Welcome to the House of Cult podcast. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Sarafina and Emma, the powerhouse sibling duo behind Bonnie Trash. Hailing from Guelph, Ontario, the post-punk and goth rock outfit is here to talk about their new album, Mourning You, set to drop on February 28th via Hand Drawn Dracula, amongst a bunch of different topics. But before we get into any of that, first want to ask, how are y'all doing today on this lovely Saturday afternoon, I would assume?
I'm doing great. It is going to drop down to, I think, minus 20 degrees Celsius today. It is overcast. We are really experiencing a Canadian winter right now. So happy to be indoors.
Born and
Born and
raised in
raised.
Guelph. Yep. And then
Yeah.
our grandparents immigrated to Guelph in the 60s. And then
Wow.
we have family still in Italy as well, in northern Italy.
Okay, Northern Italy. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
My family's from Southern Italy in Calabria,
Oh,
to be
Oh,
cool.
nice.
specific. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sort of want to touch on that a little bit. Like before we dive into everything that's happening currently with the new album, I want to bring it back to your early years, growing up in Guelph and discovering music as kids, but also as siblings together and going on that journey with each other. So I'm kind of curious, growing up in Guelph, like what kind of music were you exposed to, maybe around the house with your family, friends, anything like that? How did that journey sort of start, just being a music fan, even before you began to pick up instruments yourselves?
Totally. Our uncles, so our Zios, they were or are also musicians. So, and of course, in classic Italian lineage fashion, you live beside your grandparents. And they're always at the house.
Yep.
So we were really early exposed to watching what it means to play live, and also what it means to practice too. For a while, one of our Zios was living with our grandparents for a period of time while he was launching his business. And it was really exciting to be in the house and just watch him practice every once in a while, right? And knowing that that's what it sounds like when you practice. So I think that was really some interesting introductions there in Guelph. I'm going to give you some space there, Sarah, because
Sure,
you
yeah.
have things to say.
That's such a early memory too, Emma. Like it's great that you shared that too. And I think the early days was being exposed to a lot of the vinyl records that our father had around the house. Like one of the first records I ever spun was Black Sabbath, and it's still to this
Yeah.
day one of my all-time favorite records. But Emma really inspired me to want to play music because Emma started playing guitar, and I was like, oh, Emma's so cool. They're playing guitar now. Like, I want to hang out with my sister. Like, what can I do? So then I started playing drums. So that's kind of how we started at a very early age, playing music together around the age of 11 or 12, starting to write like instrumental rock music. And it wasn't until sort of, teenage years that I started to get more interested in vocals. So that's kind of how music kick-started. And
Yeah.
the horror genre, horror movies are still a major inspiration in terms of for me, music and songwriting. So yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, we grew up outside of the city, so we were in the country a bit. So you have to play together. So that's how you spend time is you write music together. You make a bunch of sound together. That's what you do. You can't walk to town.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's cool. Yeah, a lot of those early times, Sarah and I were just like, great, we have March break. We're just going to make a bunch of sound together. So it's cool.
Absolutely. I mean, sort of touching on that, like you mentioned not being exactly in the city, where you grew up. But I'm curious, like, what was the music scene sort of like in Guelph, Ontario? Because,
Oh yeah.
I consider myself a bit of a Canadian music connoisseur, and I actually do have I think a pretty good understanding of some of the different pockets of scenes in the Ontario area, but maybe more so in areas like Oakville or like Burlington and like Hamilton and areas like that. But not so much Guelph. I think the only thing I've maybe have heard of from Guelph like back in the day was like maybe a couple of like more hardcore bands, a couple emo bands and stuff like that. So I'm really curious what the scene was sort of like when y'all were first starting to play shows and going down there to get that started.
That's a great question, and I think even before our time, like I was born in the early '90s, but Fugazi played in Guelph,
Oh,
in
wow. Okay.
'89.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's documentation that yeah, Fugazi I think played actually twice um, in Guelph. So that just kind of gives you a bit of a picture in terms of sort of the heavier sort of rock and punk, metal, hardcore scene. Like Guelph growing up had a venue called The Shadow, and a lot of heavier rock shows, metal shows were there. Guelph was, and it's slowly becoming, of course, after the pandemic, a lot of venues have shut down.
Yeah.
It's starting to sort of build up again. But Guelph for years and years, was a tour stop for a lot of bands touring Canada in between like London, Toronto, Montreal. Guelph would be that kind of midpoint.
Okay.
And even before like 89 or the 90s and 2000s with the sort of heavier rock, punk, metal scene, the University of Guelph would put on massive shows. They would host big shows. I can't name some of the bands off the top of my head at the moment. I'm kind of lapsing right now, but yeah,
I
it's
can
been a
throw it
major
in.
stop. Yeah, please,
Yeah.
Emma. Thank you.
It
Please.
probably didn't sound good because it was in Peter Clark Hall, which is acoustically treated in a very interesting way. But yeah, Iggy Pop has played, Alice Cooper has played,
Wow.
in War and Mem, Kiss before their costumes played, according
Wow.
to my mother. So yeah, it's a stop. It's and like many cities and our smaller towns, uh, the scene waxes and wanes. Guelph also has a significant folk scene
Okay.
because of the Hillside Festival. So, needless to say, it is very musical. Um, Factors such as socioeconomics change the way that it proliferates and then regenerates again. But yeah, overall, it's an exceptionally artistic space to be in. It's really cool to be part of it.
That's really cool. I mean, and also considering that it is a college town, it would make sense that it would kind of come in waves sometimes, different artists being there for maybe a 4-year gap and then a different
Yep.
wave of artists coming in. So that totally
Yep.
makes sense.
But it's
So,
cool because people become promoters, right? Or they
yeah,
try something new. Yeah, it's great.
that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, and it's mentioned, that Bonnie Trash has sort of been a lifelong project of yours, but I'm curious when y'all were growing up, what were some of the first bands that you started together? Like, is there anything that you want to talk about considering that? And sort of, what were those projects like, and were they somewhat sonically different than what you're working with Bonnie Trash today?
Funny enough,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Funny.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Sarah. Yeah. We're just
No,
gonna
it's all
talk over
good.
each other this whole
I
time.
I know it's tough. It's tough when you're not only when you're twins. It's tough. Um, uh, um, sorry. Projects that we had in the past. Sorry, we had an all female rock band. As teenagers, and that was awesome. We were called Red Rosary, and actually our drummer today, Dana Bellamy, she played with us as teenagers. So we've
Oh,
known each other
wow.
for a very long time.
Yeah.
And that makes Bonnie Trash, like our band, super meaningful to me and to us, because we've continued those a very beautiful friendship with Dana for so long. And she fits into the groove, the pocket. Like she's such an incredible musician, so she knows how we sort of work. So we had that band growing up as teenagers, and then we had a psych rock project for a couple of years, and made some records. And um, honestly, after that project, I really wanted to go back to our roots of heavy rock, because Emma and I think I can speak on behalf of Emma too. We love
Yes.
heavy music. And I just wanted to kickstart a project just with Emma and write heavier music. So that's how Bonnie Trash kind of started back in 2013.
Funny enough, though, we've only really had two bands before us, right? Like Red
Yeah,
Rosary, and it
yeah,
feels like we're doing full circle with Red Rosary, and then we had the
yeah,
folk,
yeah.
and that was a fun time too. So, and now we have Bonnie Trash. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, also considering that your first band is called Red Rosary, like most people's first band names are terrible, and that's actually a very good band name. Like
I felt pretty good about it. Yeah.
that's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, like,
That's funny. It's pretty good. Yeah.
that's incredible. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so diving into Bonnie Trash, like you mentioned, wanting to touch more into those heavier aspects, like what were some of those influences that first kind of sparked the idea to do Bonnie Trash in the first place?
Black
Oh,
Sabbath.
yeah, Black Sabbath, full circle. Black Sabbath, Love, Hole, Joy Division, The Cure, Bauhaus. I could the list could go on and on. Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana. Um, Now, I love listening to some more modern bands like Cult of Luna and Death
Yeah,
Heaven. Um, but really that those bands, going back to the roots, those bands really inspired and influenced us to write heavier music. But also, to be honest with you, for myself as a songwriter, um, movies really inspire me, horror
yeah.
Mhm.
movies. I always sort of visualize the visual comes sometimes before the lyrics or the music. So I always I draw a lot of inspiration from horror movies and horror stories. And this might sound very cheesy, but I get a lot of inspiration from Emma. Emma's guitar playing is, I'm like Emma's biggest fan. Emma's absolutely incredible, and Bonnie Trash to me was sort of selfishly made to ensure that Emma's guitar playing was really, really highlighted and out there. So that's where I draw inspiration. Emma, I'll hand it over to you.
Um, yeah, when we started Bonnie Trash, I think my two main goals was how can Godspeed You Black Emperor play Black Sabbath?
Nice.
So that was my start. I adore Godspeed. I'm always learning something whenever I listen to them or I see them live. Just even watching their musicianship now after such a career, it's such a pleasure watching how they can anticipate each other and then calmly be able to move into a next section that is improvised too. And then it brings you into these sonic contours that are exceptionally morose. Um, so it's I found that really exciting. And I just, it really heavily influenced the way that I listened afterwards and really wanted to make music with Sarah on that. So yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, God, I can remember the first time I heard Godspeed You Black Emperor. It was probably, I mean, it was definitely seeing 28 Days Later when I
Yeah.
was like 8 years old and East Hastings
Yep.
is playing. You're just like, this is the craziest thing you've ever heard. And like, such a magical band. And I totally hear the traces of those influences in your music. And I love that y'all both brought up topics I wanted to touch on, which was both horror movies, but then also, yeah, Emma's guitar playing. I mean, it is so ear-catching. Like the guitar riffs are so angular and hooky and memorable. And I feel like it's in a way that a lot of times in, whether we call it post-punk or goth rock or anything like that, there is a bit of formula, I feel like sometimes with the way that a guitar is applied to that kind of music and the way that you're
Mm.
doing it feels so limitless and free. It does not have any kind of like genre restrictions to it. And I think that's a really cool aspect of what you do with this
Wow.
project. Sure.
Thank you. That's
Absolutely.
super neat. Cool. I feel like Garth right now. Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And the horror movie thing definitely comes out as well too. I mean, listening to it, it's like, I mean, we're talking Italian, you could hear it in a Dario Argento movie, like you could hear it in something like that. And I'm kind of curious, like, what are some of those horror movies that really inspired you and really kind of help you put that imagery into your music?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked that. I mean, you mentioned Dario Argento. Suspiria is one of my favorites. I love Argento films. I'm wearing an Exorcist shirt, so The
Yeah.
Exorcist, yeah, The Exorcist is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. The Thing is another sci-fi horror. Like
Yeah.
that's probably my absolute. It's so tough to pick the favorites, but yeah, The Thing, The Exorcist. Um, Suspiria. You mentioned 28 Days Later, like what a like a perfect film. And
Yeah.
of course, like Godspeed. It just was just magnificent. That's one of my favorites as well. I could go on and on and on with horror movies. Evil Dead is one of my all-time favorites as well. The original Evil Dead, just absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I could go on, Alessandro, just listing horror movies, but it really they really inspire me in terms of songwriting and writing. Sometimes more so over music, recorded music. Um, it's just the way that in movies, of course, you have a scene, you have a narrative aspect, and of course, there's music underneath or a score, and I find that so beautiful to kind of try to translate that into songwriting, the sort of narrative aspect and cinematic elements in movies, as I said, help me sort of visualize conceptually writing a song. So honestly, more often than not, these days, I'm kind of more inspired by movies in terms of my writing process. But I love music, of course. But
Absolutely. I mean, during like writing or recording, do y'all ever put on horror movies like in the background while you're writing songs?
That's
you
a,
know what?
I don't think we've done that yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you just like
Huh.
blew my mind. Like, why haven't we
I
done this
ask, I mean, I have
before?
a lot of friends that do that as well. And even when I'm making
Cool.
music, sometimes I'll put something on in the background too. And I don't know,
Huh.
I think it's a really cool process. You never know what's going to come out when you do that.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
usually after we hear something or we talk about something, we're like, or we have to figure out a music video. It's like, do you remember that movie, you know, yeah, put that on. Yeah, we should go and watch it. We should watch that. Like 30 Days of Night was a recent thing. Like, do you remember
Oh,
30 Days of Night? Yeah, let's watch 30 Days of Night. All right, let's watch that and go, that was really scary. Yeah, it was. Script was awful though. Yeah, but
are we talking the Josh
that's what we
Hartnett movie,
Yeah,
30
yeah,
yeah.
Days of
yeah.
Night? Oh yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, John Huston's terrifying in that.
yeah, it's you know what? I remember seeing that in theaters in eighth grade when it came out and thinking it was like really great. And I gave it a rewatch recently and I was like, it's a movie, it's
Yeah,
pretty
it's
good.
Fine,
okay.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
But those,
It's fun. It's
it's
fun.
yeah. Or that's the thing. I think that's part of our process now. Is hey, do you remember that movie? Yeah, let's go watch it. Versus us watching something and writing to it. Maybe we should try that, Sarah.
That's a really good point though. I haven't done that, and but we do, we Emma and I will be like, hey, we gotta watch a horror movie together. Like we need some inspiration, or like let's like watch something together and yeah, drop some visuals for a music video or for a record or a song. Um it sounds funny, but I guess when writing like horror stuff, I normally like to be in a dark room with no
Yeah.
lights.
No, I mean
I
that
guess
makes
that
sense.
says
Yeah.
something. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, before we dive into more music stuff, I mean, I gotta ask though, then, is there any recent horror movies that y'all have seen that sort of kind of sparked something within you that kind of excited you from the genre in recent times?
Yeah. Um, Ari Aster's Hereditary and Midsummer. I thought they were so exciting,
Yeah.
so exciting. I hadn't seen something that uh had a scene that was really arresting, so much so that you were still physically processing it until the end of the film, and then delayed laughter.
Yeah.
What a roller coaster. So that storytelling I thought was super fun. Um, yeah, those. those of recent, I think were really exciting to me. I have to think a little bit further, but Sarah, you have some ideas there too.
I I mean, I could talk right away about Nosferatu, but I'll just put a
Yeah.
pin in that for a moment, because that's so fresh. But I guess the substance, like,
Mm,
I guess, I loved it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. That's really one to note. That's come out recently that I really enjoyed. In the last couple of years, Talk to Me. I thought that one was absolutely fantastic too. I really loved that. I still have to watch. I saw the TV Glow. I can't
I was
believe I
about to
still.
Same.
say that y'all have to see that movie. It
It's
is.
on
Okay.
my list. Like, I literally
Yeah.
today I read another article about it, and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I need to watch this as soon as possible. So I think I'll probably watch it tonight. And then yeah, the new Nosferatu. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was beautifully shot. I love Willem Dafoe. I have
Yeah.
nothing but positive things to say. We can kind of go down a critique of it, but
I have
I thought it was
thoughts.
great. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Nothing more to say.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, you go.
Oh no. Um, I so before I watched Nosferatu, I had revisited um the 1922 piece. I normally work as a live sound technician, so I've definitely seen it way too many times. Because every Halloween somebody's got an improvised score to it, and it's really fun to mix. But having watched it before, I revisited the new version with Eggers, who, The Witch was exceptional and The Lighthouse was exceptional. I didn't feel scared, and I think that's what
Mm,
made me a little bit sad was there were you have this story of somebody who is staying with a stranger and every night they bite you and
Mhm.
you cannot leave. That's a very terrifying experience, regardless as to whether they are a vampire or not, or something supernatural.
Yeah.
There's something really off-putting, and it puts you in a really emotionally um, difficult state. Like imagine yourself being in that position where you
mm,
are not only allured because your life depends on it. This is your big money setup, but you don't know how to escape. And also, you're in a cliff and you're in a completely different country that you don't know. And this person keeps you, but
Mhm.
they keep you in a way that you cannot leave. Like that's really terrifying. And
Yeah.
yet I wasn't terrified. So
mm,
um I thought it was incredibly cinematic, very gorgeous, but the essence of feeling used, like that's the whole concept of a vampire. It takes from you. Not
Mhm.
only does it take your time, it takes your life. There's this frustrating element, there's an invisible quality where you can't quite pinpoint it until it's too late. Your blood is drained. That to me wasn't there. But that being said, a lot of people had a good time. So that's okay too. If I need to be the one critic, that's okay.
No, to be honest, I think you have sort of echoed how I felt about the film, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could have been a little bit scarier considering what it's actually about. 100%. I also thought
Yeah.
he could have looked a little scarier, but that's just me. That's the one thing. Like I didn't think he looked that scary, you know?
he
It
was
was a
not
choice.
scary. It
It,
was a it was a
yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
It was a choice. Like, and I agree with both of you too. I love this. Let's chat about movies. Um, Really
Yeah.
though, like, I totally agree with you. He could have been scarier. And like, it's tough because, like, as you just said, Emma, it's a choice. So trying to think of why certain choices were made. Like, why were these
Mhm.
choices made for this incarnation of Nosferatu? But to echo Emma, the original is hands down like far more scarier
Yeah.
Well,
than the
even the
new
frame
one.
rate, right? Like even the frame rate in the original, it's not like it was the most intended because that was the frame rate, but the way that the carriage moves through piece for piece and that unpredictable speed up, jarring, that's something where I thought, oh my, I was so excited because I thought, oh, what's Eggers going to do with that? That's going to be really cool. Perhaps that's going to be incorporated into that. And it wasn't, but again, everybody has their desires for a film. This was made. That's great. Can't wait for another one. Yeah. But I don't know. That 1922, they nailed it. Yeah.
All right, okay. I think we can put Nosferatu to bed now. So, but
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
no, no, absolutely. No, I think we should dive into Mourning You.
Okay.
Obviously, this is the new record coming out, February 28th again. And I want to touch on the overall themes of this record, and obviously it is dealing with mortality, death, grief, and I'm curious just right off the bat, like why were those topics so much at the forefront of all of your minds going into this album?
Well, to simply put it, our former record, the previous record, Malocchio, was really a conceptual record to archive a lot of our Nona Maria's supernatural real life horror stories. Her voice is all over that record, and that record is just really holds dear to those stories. Unfortunately, after that record, or even before that record was released, she passed away. And this record, quite literally, Mourning You, is all about mourning, um, not just mourning her death, but going through like it's about mourning her death, but it's also about like the grief that has come as a result of experience a loss in life and the horrors of grief, and also the way that like grief is super important too, and it's also a reminder of love and these beautiful memories of a loved one too. So there's always that kind of light in the darkness. So I hope that gives a little bit more sort of context. Emma, did you want to add?
It's sonically a collection of ruminations.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and thinking about, at least for me, from a guitar standpoint, was trying to sonically express uh, everything that I was thinking and reflecting about as I missed this person. I miss her. I miss her a lot. And thinking about her story, her life, and finding how grateful I am that I grew up here. Because being a settler in a space and being a new lineage of settlers in Canada, there's often those holding of stories from people who came here. And that's part of a dialogue and wondering why somebody came here. And a lot of people say, well, it's for economics, it's for this. And um, there's war. There are many reasons why somebody leaves. Um, and while making this record, it was really reflecting on why she created a new life and why we're able to live the way we are here. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
That's beautiful. That's incredible. I mean, what an incredible tribute to somebody who meant so much to you. I mean, that's incredible. And you mentioned, on your previous album, her being a really central part to that. You know, I'm kind of curious, like, what are some of those stories that she did impart on you that sort of are touchstones for this project?
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry, Emma, go ahead.
No, it's okay. We're in the Zoom delay glitch. I love it. So Malocchio was the collection of various stories that centered around, at least from a northern perspective, I would say, or holistically a Trevisani perspective of what the evil eye meant or how it circulated,
Yeah.
how it was um, something that became an affliction yet also a curse
Mhm.
or a haunting, right? Like it took on these really different personalities and how that circulated in the way that she would tell these stories and the way that we would impart on them, like the idea that um well, one such story that sticks to me, and I think, oh, this would be such a good horror story, and I wish she was around so we could collaborate on it. But there's this story where her younger sister um, ran to, or snuck out of the house, and they went to this this it was like a I want to call it an exorcism. Um, she had a lot of different terms for it. And their parents said, "Don't go there. Something will follow you back." She goes. She comes back. She gets a knock on the door, right? And it is from a strigaria, right? Like very different versions of strangers or paranormal strangers, things like that.
Mhm.
And ask, "Can you let me in?" And she says no. And then she has a malocchio, and she has, she's starting to have shapes that come up from the feathers in her pillows. She has drastic mood changes, and you can't tell your parents. So what do
Mhm.
you do? So they figure out a way how to reverse the malocchio, which they received um, uh, wisdom from Zia Mafalda, and Zia Mafalda said you need to take out all the feathers, you need to boil them and burn them and throw them in the creek, and then you will be fine, right? So just this story of how do you deal with this problem, but you're too young to understand the magnitude, and how do you grow with this? So that's a story that I just adore and still think about, obviously. Sarah.
Yeah,
Wow.
sorry, Alessandro, I think you wanted to follow up with that. So
No,
go
no,
right
no,
ahead.
no, no, please, please.
Oh, I mean that story is really, really one that I think about often too. Thinking that was she possessed? Was there some sort of possession, or something else too? These are stories. These are these are the lives of our family members. Um, I think some of the scary ones for me are more of the supernatural stories. This one is that Emma just relayed, but one of them that uh, really terrified me is she told me she would have kind of a reoccurring dream of something, not someone, but something. If she's sleeping at night, young kid, whatever, and something grabs her by the ankles and drags her out of bed. And that really stuck with me for a long time until I experienced it through sleep paralysis.
Mm.
And I experienced the same kind of thing, but she didn't say it was sleep paralysis,
Yeah.
right? Maybe perhaps didn't have the terminology for it. So said it was, this something, this like being. So I think I had potentially the same kind of sleep paralysis as my Nona did as a young woman. So that's really um, held with me for many years. Another one too is when they were living in Italy in our Nono's old family house. One night he was shutting off all the lights, everything in the house, and going to go to bed. And as he was walking up the stairs to go to sleep, something knocked him out from like his head, like huge, just sort of knock, and no one was there. So again, like, what was that? Was it a spirit, like some sort of like entity? So I like very much believe in the supernatural. We could probably have a whole other show to talk about that. I very much believe in it, and I, uh, I really cherish those stories. But they're also warnings as well.
Mm.
I find them as warnings. So
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like us as Italians, I think it's kind of in our blood to believe in the supernatural in a lot
yeah,
of ways. I
Have
know
to.
that's a
I think you're
generalization,
right.
but I think it's pretty true. I mean, it's pretty impressed on you from an early age for sure. I mean, hearing similar stories from my grandma as well too, and I've had the exact same experience, like being dragged out of bed as a young kid. And
Wow.
I also remember, it's kind of funny. I don't know if this is the same term, but when I was a kid, I think I was listening to music around my grandma, and I did the devil horns, and my grandma like freaked out and thought I was cursing her. And I was like, no, 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 I'm just rocking out. And she was
Yeah.
absolutely terrified. And
Our note,
thankfully, I explained
yeah,
to her that that's not what I was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Ma cosa fetula? Yeah. Like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Thanks for sharing that.
No,
Thanks,
thank
and
you
also
for sharing that. Absolutely. And I think
that
I
connection.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so cool that you're representing, your culture with your music and a topic that I don't think is touched on enough in music, like Italian superstitions and all that. I mean, I think it's a very niche concept, I feel like, in the terms of music. And it's so cool that y'all have explored that so much. That's awesome. And
Thank you.
I want to touch on the actual recording process. I wasn't able to see who exactly produced it, but sonically, it's very massive sounding for your genre. I think a lot of times songs in like the post-punk and goth rock genre, like we were discussing, sometimes the production can be very thin sounding, and I
Mm.
feel like yours has so much low end. The guitars are really full, the vocals are very intelligible, you can hear them very well, and it feels like it feels high fidelity, but also not overproduced by any means as well either. And I'm kind of curious, like going into the production and recording process, what was that experience like? And, did you work with anybody to sort of achieve that?
Oh
We
yeah, it's
we
the magic of
did.
Josh. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the magic.
I, I know. I
We're
mean,
talking on each other.
I'll say something really quick,
Okay,
and
go.
then I'll
Yeah, you do it.
we we co-produce our music with Josh Karodi, and he's absolutely fabulous. He was someone that Em and I have been wanting to work with for like over 10 years. He co-produced Malocchio with us and our EP, My Love Remains the Same, and then of course Mourning You. He's fantastic. We love the music that he makes and the music that he's produced in the past. So for you to talk about sort of all the layers and the sort of like fuller production, that's not just as a result of Emma's guitar playing and the way that Emma and I envision the music, but it's also with Josh. Like we will bring songs, we'll bring our demos to Josh and we'll go, hey, how can you help us like get this sort of to the next level so that it's sounding like this, and this. And that's what he does. So Emma.
Yeah. Josh, I love the way that Josh does guitars. They're big and they're grimy, and yet they're also poetic at the same time.
Mhm.
Um, Josh also captures incredible drum sounds. And I think what I love the most about working with Josh, and I think it comes out in the sounds, is it's not necessarily just how he hears it. It's a it's an outcome of collaboration.
Mhm.
And so there's us bringing in our idea and Josh saying, "Oh, that's really awesome. How about, for example, we have 4 amps. Let's get all 4 amps going. And we're going to crank them up and we're just going to play with different feedbacks." And that's awesome. And then we're going to take all those and how about we take those feedbacks and we like do it again and we're going to pan it and then we're going to do another 2 layers of it. And part of that setup is for all of us, including Josh and everybody who's in the room, to go, "Oh, cool, that sounds awesome. Let's try this," right? So it's this stimulation of play. And it's really exciting as a result. And I love the sounds that come out of it. Or like, "Yeah, we need some more low end. How about we try a 5 string bass?" And then I'll sit there and be like, "You know what? We gotta go lower. Let's drop the tuning." And go, "Yeah, okay." And it's very exciting and filled with play as a result. Yeah.
It's
So we
very creatively collaborative, and it's I feel very not just like safe, obviously, working with Josh, but he really honors our voice and the way that we want to hear our music as well. And so there's kind of a very fine balance when you're working as a team together, right? And in the end, it's music. It's supposed to be fun, and we're having fun doing this,
Yeah.
And we were talking about this a little while ago, but this sort of element of perfection, like I think, is just it's silly. if something sounds good the first time, go with it, and play around with it, experiment. So I feel really grateful. We feel grateful to be working with Josh, and we have a really fantastic creative team.
Yeah,
It takes a team. It really
Yeah.
takes a team. It's not just us. It's Josh. It's our band. It's our label. It's our friends. It's our community that helps us big time.
I love that. And I'm also curious, about the the hooks on this album. Like the choruses feel very massive as well too. And I'm curious, how much those were developed before you went into the studio or how much those were also fleshed out in a studio setting because it feels like, the hooks are very infectious on this album in a way that
cool.
I think is really, really effective with the kind of music that you play.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of
I
course.
I think we wrote the hooks. I'm trying to think back now. All all if not most hooks were pre-written. It was creating um the textures that made the hooks come alive in studio.
Okay.
And Emma and I really
Yeah.
sort of like um, we really have sort of writing sessions together prior to going into studio to sort of have a really almost a solid idea as to those kind of hooks or structures when it comes to sort of creating that sort of big chorus. And I think we both love really big choruses, heavy rock choruses. So being able to sort of translate that and for you to say that is really, really cool. So thank you. It feels like we're
No,
getting
absolutely.
that we're getting that across. So that's awesome to hear.
For sure.
Studios cost a lot of money. You got to write your hooks
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, write your hooks first before you go in.
And I imagine y'all recorded it in Guelph.
No, we recorded it in Toronto at Witchwood Sounds. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Is
Thank you.
that what's any notable records done at that studio?
Yes, let me pop them up. So Witchwood is the new studio area for Josh. Josh initially had Candle Recording Studio. Um, Toronto changes, socioeconomics change, artistic spaces come and go as a result.
Yeah.
So he started off again with Witchwood Sound. A lot of work from, I think the new album from Bad Waitress came out of Witchwood Sound.
Yep. That's not out
Burner's
yet.
new album,
Not
no,
yep.
Burner's new
Burners.
album came out through it, which has some really great
Dermabrasion.
tones. Yep.
Dermabrasion
Dermabrasion.
slash need. There's a new band called Oil Giant that's just recorded at Witchwood. But Josh's previous studio Candle, which was it's an iconic, really Toronto iconic recording studio. He's recorded bands like Fucked Up, The Dirty Nil,
Nice.
Weaves, Dilly Dally is a big one and one of my
Mhm.
favorite bands of all time. So Josh has produced incredible records out of Candle Recording, and right now he's transitioned over to Witchwood Sound. And I think he's just getting started, Alessandro. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited to see what he produces out of that studio next.
The next thing I want to touch on too is going back to the Canadian aspect of the band. Currently, navigating the Canadian music industry, and I'm curious if there are plans to hit the States more in the next year or so. But the first thing I want to sort of touch on though is back to the Canadian aspect. It's kind of a side note. My brother actually works for Network Music, which is a Canadian
Oh,
Oh,
record
cool.
label.
yeah.
They have a ton of different artists, and I've always been kind of curious. Canada really does. I think a big thing that I was curious about is Canada does provide some kind of financial incentive to artists as well, too, in Canada. I was wondering if y'all have ever experienced, the funding that the Canadian government can provide to artists.
Absolutely. These albums wouldn't exist without the Ontario Arts Council. So we wrote a grant application the first time from Malocchio. We received it. That allowed us to go into studio and to be able to actually pay arts workers, Josh, to be able to do his thing. And we tried again, right? We wrote another Ontario Arts Council grant application, and that allowed us to make Mourning You. Without that, we wouldn't be able to make these albums at all.
We
Yeah.
would not have been able to go into studio and to really hear our art, our music the way that we really want to hear it. Like we
Hmm.
can record music, but I, I'm not I'm not a I'm not Josh Carodi, and we want to work with Josh. We want to work with a producer that's going to help us out and kind of have our music be what we really want it to sound like. So you're absolutely right. The Ontario Arts Council has been extremely supportive, and our record label as well. Factor in Canada has been very helpful with festival grants, show grants as well. So, but I can't stress enough the importance of funding, especially going into a studio. And it's so important for artists, when you go into a studio and you hear how you really want your music to be produced, it's a really beautiful thing. And there's so much care that's being put into your music. It feels really beautiful. Feels taken
Yeah.
care of. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I couldn't even imagine it here in the States, us having something
Yeah.
like that. I mean, it's so incredible that y'all actually fund the arts, up in Canada. It's incredible. I mean, it's unfortunately such an afterthought, I feel like, down here. And hopefully that could change, but we'll see. But I mean, what an incredible way to make records and not have this enormous financial. I work for a record label myself, and I know the costs associated with creating records, and to have that, to have some of that burden taken off of you, oh my God. Like,
Oh, it's huge. It's
Big
huge.
time.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Big time.
But
Of course, we have friends, like, we all know countless friends, bands, like, who have been trying to make a record or putting a record together for a couple years, because of the studio costs. And for anybody who's listening, if you need any help or support or guidance, like, reach out to us, or find resources like online, for some of these grants in Canada. But we're still advocating for more arts funding across the board. It's just so important for arts to be funded, and for musician and artists to be able to continue to do what they do, because with art there's really no culture and there's no entertainment, there's nothing, so we
yeah,
need that in our lives big time.
Yeah. You need to be
100%.
inspired. How do
Yep.
you
Yeah.
imagine a new world without being inspired? You
Yeah.
need that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's literally the essence of life is creativity, 100%. And I'm also, touring Canada. I don't know how much y'all have done touring across Canada, but obviously touring Canada is, vastly different than touring the States. I feel like there's probably, maybe 8 or 9 like A market cities, I would say, in Canada, but you're also driving like 10 hours in between different places and whatnot. I'm sort of curious, if you have any, if you can sort of touch on those experiences of touring Canada, with this project, and how that sort of might differ for our US listeners here on the podcast.
Definitely. I like crunching numbers. That's my whole thing is logistics for
Yeah.
Sarah and I get stuck in process. But early on, we were crunching numbers and looking at what the feasibility is for touring in a van with gas. And we're in our 30s. I can't sleep on a floor anymore, man. Like I can't,
No.
and it's you got to take care of yourself. So that
Yes.
is unfeasible by itself. So the way to get to different cities in Canada in a way where you are not breaking the bank, you're not losing a vehicle, is to apply for festivals, and especially applying for festivals that are under a list for showcase grant funding. And that was
Through
the way that we
Factor.
were able to do it. So
Yep.
our first go was to go to Halifax for the Halifax Pop Explosion Festival in 2018. That was great. We were able to start going to the East Coast and then have our funds covered to do that for a one off. Same for any other place we've been to Canada outside of of Montreal. And even then, we received funding to help us with that cost. Um, we're not in a position to do that otherwise. It doesn't make sense. You're continuously paying to play. In the current economic situation of being a musician, you're still paying to play, even though you're telling yourself you're not.
Mhm.
So, how can you mitigate that? Do it in a way that is feasible, that is not going to burn you out and continue to devalue yourself. Do it in a way that makes sense and feels good
Totally.
too.
And like,
Yeah.
it's for, for people. It's a full band. Like we want to make sure that we're taken care of, but our bandmates are taken care of too. And that's just really important, like in terms of wanting to be healthy and not, as Emma said, burning yourself out, right? And valuing yourself too. But yeah, I echo Emma. That's how we sort of play shows in Canada, is more so festivals outside of Southern Ontario and
Hmm.
Quebec, like Montreal. We try to just play as many festivals across the country as possible. So we've been to St. John's, Newfoundland, beautiful, beautiful place. We've played Lanya Vanya Music Festival there 2 times. We've been out to Calgary and Edmonton. We played FME in Rouyn-Noranda in Quebec. So we try to play festivals more than anything, Alessandro. And then within Southern Ontario, there's a lot of really cool cities here to go and play. And so that's kind of how we've traditionally toured in Canada. And it's been great
Yeah.
so far. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Have you all ever made it out, all the way west to like Vancouver or areas like that at all?
Not yet.
Not
Not
No.
yet,
yet.
not yet. We'd love
We'd love
to.
to.
Yeah, would absolutely love to. And our first NYC show was in 2023. We played at the New Colossus Festival, and that's the only time that we've played in the States. But we're working on that. We're working on
Yes. We're working
going
on
to
that.
the States sometime this year.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. Yeah, I mean, that was my next question was, what can we expect, getting y'all to the States? That would be awesome. Yeah. I mean,
Sweet.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're trying.
We're
yeah,
trying, we're in the
absolutely.
planning
Yeah.
stages, and like it's something that we really, really want to do. And I think another thing to note too, which I'm not sure if a lot of people know outside of being an artist or musician, but we have to pay for visas. Canadians
Yeah.
have to pay for visas to be able to play in the States, and they can be fairly expensive. So that's another kind of hurdle that or roadblock for a lot of musicians and bands. So we're trying to think about again how to do this so that we're still like we don't get burnt out and that we're still sort of obviously taken care of. And again, it's not just Emma and I; it's our full band, and we really want to make sure that that everyone's okay. We're in our 30s, as Emma said. We really can't sleep on the floor. Some of us have bad backs. Like we have to put our health right and well being first and foremost, so that we can play the best show ever for
Of
the
course.
best show ever for people who are paying to come and see us. We want to put on really amazing shows, so we want to make sure that we're okay to do that.
It takes time to create sustainable systems of entertainment, and I want to do it for the rest of my life. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, just before we wrap this up, just what's next? Obviously the record is coming out in late February. What can we expect from this release? What's coming after that? Anything else you want to share that might be on the horizon? And then, yeah, pretty much and also, where can fans find you as well too on social media and just anything you want listeners to know?
All
Thank
right. Go
you.
for it, Sarah.
Yeah, I think what's coming up next is well, before the album release, we have another single and music video coming out very, very soon. After the record, we'll be playing more shows within Canada, setting up a tour in the States. That's in the planning stages. But I think the biggest thing on my mind right now is writing the next record. And I really cannot wait to do that. And I think the next record is going to be even heavier. Um,
Nice.
than what we've produced with Mourning You. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
I love
That's
that.
everything.
I feel like I'm seeing this a lot with bands today, and oftentimes as a band goes on, maybe their sound will become more accessible. But I think when the bands go heavier as they go on, it is way more effective. And when you're seeing bands doing that now, it seems to really be paying off to really dive into those
Definitely.
more visceral areas of the music, especially considering the times that, we're living in now. I think heavy music just makes a lot of sense for sure.
I agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Um, yeah, and people can find us on Instagram at Bonnie Trash Band. Um, I guess TikTok too. We don't have a huge presence on TikTok, but I don't know if it's going to be banned too. But our Instagram is the most sort of prevalent social media, and then we have like our website and other links to like all of everywhere that you can sort of stream our music on Spotify, Bandcamp, and etc. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, y'all. This has been an awesome conversation and so excited for the release of the album. I think people are going to really, really, really love it. It's such a breath of fresh air for the genre of music that y'all play. And yeah, just really excited to see what happens with this new release.
Thank you so much, Alessandro, and have a wonderful day.